Hey team, you're about to experience my interview with Julie DIXON. Julie was the head of B2B e-commerce with VF Corp for 20 years, and she is now an independent B2B consultant with the B2B Clinic. It was a fantastic conversation with Julie about her vast experience with B2B e-commerce and how she has seen it evolve over the last 2 decades. Enjoy. Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Julie DIXON to the pod. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's great to be here.
Look, I love and appreciate anytime I reach out on LinkedIn. I did reach out to you on LinkedIn, and I scour LinkedIn, especially looking for people with B2B e-commerce experience, because there's not as many of us out there with B2B experience as there are out there with B2C and D2C experience. And whenever I find somebody, I latch onto them, and I'm just like, man, I got to get this person on the podcast because they have skills, knowledge, experience that is in relatively short supply. And when I ran across your profile, it was like, man, I got to try to get Julie on. So I really appreciate you spending time with me today.
Well, thank you. And it's great to talk with somebody else who also has such experience in B2B as well. You and I both go way back in terms of B2B history. So I'm excited to have this conversation today.
As am I. Now, before we get into your background and all this amazing experience you've had, and we start to dig into some of the anecdotes and stories and walk down memory lane, how did you even become interested in this space? Because it seems that almost every person that I interview that has some sort of a B2B background, they either fell into it, they had somebody that dragged them into it. There was no fixed pathway of how we all ended up here. And we're almost like a bit of a ragtag bunch, right? And so I'd love to know how you came to be in the B2B space.
The way I got there was so winding and convoluted, but at the same time, it was the perfect synthesis of everything that I had done before. It was amazing. So I started out in college. I wanted to be in geology and I wanted to study global ocean currents. And it was a perfect time to get into that. And I didn't realize it. I think the year that I got out of college, there were very few tenured positions available in the United States. And I just couldn't see where it was going to go. And I decided instead to pursue a degree in outdoor recreation administration. So I could do anything from managing a baseball park to working in Parks and Rec department to leading expeditions, anything along those lines. It was all outdoors, but anything that you can think of to be paid during doing outdoors. And when I got done with that, I had intended to start a sea kayaking expedition business with my then fiance. And that relationship unfortunately didn't work out, but I kept on with the idea of eventually getting back to it. I went and did what's it called? An internship at an environmental center. We led expeditions for youth at risk and also for Catholic priests and rehabilitation. I'm not going to say any more about that, other than to say that by the end of that internship, I had decided that maybe that wasn't the best thing for me to be doing. And I ended up in outdoor retail. And I ended up on Mount Desert Island in Maine, in Bar Harbor, working for a retail store there. And while I was in the internship, I had done some work for temporary work for a steel manufacturing company. They manufactured steel tubing, and learned how to do Quattro Pro, and I learned to do 10 key there. So that really set me up for work with data analysis. And while I was retail, I got to be a buyer for the store that I worked for. So I did a lot of analysis there, but then got picked up by the North Face in 1998 and started doing merchandising work for them. I quickly figured out that being a sales merchandiser was not going to be a long-lived position. It's really indicative when you can't say how you provide value to a company that you're not going to be there for very long. And I think that it was maybe 6 months after I joined, they decided the program really didn't have the value that they were looking for and let go at the time. They let go all of their sales merchandisers. They've since reinstated the program much better. I'm sure that they have much more value that they offer the company now. At the time, it just wasn't well considered, I guess you could say. And I could figure it out pretty quickly. So I started taking more classes in Excel, which was actually up and running by then. And I got a position in sales planning right before they fired all of the sales merchandisers. And then I moved from sales planning into sales operations and then into customer service. And finally, in customer service, they decided that they needed an online order entry tool. And that was in 2002. And that was how I got started in B2B. But all of that stuff, all of the Excel, the retail, the customer service, the sales operation, all of these different things, it all meant that I totally got what we were trying to do. I understood the whole, like every single piece along the line, I knew how it was supposed to work. And that was the piece that really got me started in a way that I never would have expected. And then from there, the VF eventually bought the North Face, and I started doing B2B for their other brands as well, and eventually got to do all of the brands in North America. They had a team of about 8 people, and that was over the course of probably 20, yeah, about a little over 20 years. So I really got in on B2B when B2B was just getting started as an e-commerce kind of tool. There was already, obviously, EDI has been in place forever. That was already there, but this was something different. So yeah, it was definitely a very convoluted, but in the end, a very valuable history to get me where I went, where I eventually got to.
Wow, what a story. And this distinctly reminds me of how where because my first career was hospitality. I worked in hospitality for a few years, and the last big restaurant that I worked at before I left the United States was Claim Jumper, and it was a Wild West themed restaurant, and it was pretty famous at the time. They've had some financial issues since then when the family sold it off. But one of the things that I never went through the training program for management training, but part of their management training program was you had to work in every single role in the entire restaurant before you could become a manager there. So even if you had previous hospitality experience, management experience, restaurant experience, didn't matter. They didn't care. You were going to work all the way from being a host up the front or a hostess. You were going to be a busboy or girl. You were going to work the bar. You were going to work the every single role in the kitchen. You were going to do literally every single role in the business for a minimum of a week before you could come on and be a restaurant manager with them or one of the management team in a restaurant. And I at the time I understood it, but didn't, because I was thinking you're never probably going to have to jump in and bust tables as a manager. There's 40 or 50 staff in the restaurant. It's highly unlikely you're going to have to jump in and bust a table. It's highly unlikely you're going to have to get in there and vacuum the floor. It's highly unlikely you're going to have to jump in there and do these, what we would maybe consider a menial task that doesn't require necessarily a huge amount of skill to be able to do it. But I think in hindsight, the thing that it gives team members is empathy, if nothing else. Even if you're not necessarily learning a skill that is difficult to learn, I guess it's giving empathy to all the team members that are required to make this ship run. And even if you never have to actually jump in and do that job, it allows you to understand all the interconnecting parts that allow you to actually run the business, all the way down from the most senior manager all the way down to the person that greets people at the door. What does it take to allow this business to run efficiently and profitably? And it feels like what you went through in a de facto sort of a way, which is starting at the ground floor and working your way all the way up vertically through the business into this very senior role in the end. You knew how the component parts work to make this business hum.
Exactly. And I think that empathy is a really great term to use because those pain points that exist in every single role out there, right? Whenever you have a job, you always have pain points. So understanding the pain points from the position of having experienced them, you can really, you can more effectively prioritize what someone is saying when they're talking to you about a problem if you've experienced it yourself. And you can say, oh yeah, I really understand that is a really big problem for you. I know that takes hours and hours when you have that problem come up. And so I'm going to pay attention to that problem for you because I know that's a bottleneck. I know it's something is preventing you from getting an order in, let's say, or it's preventing you from being able to talk in a way that matters to your customer, to your buyer. And my saying is always that B2B e-commerce exists, and the role of the sales rep also exists to reduce risk for buyers. That's all we're trying to do, is reduce risk. So when you're a buyer, your life is about taking chances and making the best choice that you possibly can make based on the information you have at hand. So the role of a B2B e-commerce site, in the same way that a sales rep is, it's about reducing risk. So anything that you can do to understand how a particular pain point increases risk and then prioritize it accordingly will help you to be more successful.
And for those people that may not know out there who the VF Corp is, VF Company, they are basically what I call a house of brands, primarily in the apparel and shoe industry, all the way from they own brands, very famous brands. Some of these go back many, many in generations: Vans, North Face, Timberland, Dickies, Eastpak, Icebreaker, JanSport. This is a portfolio of brands that literally for many Americans are absolutely household names. Like when I grew up, and still to this day, I still wear Vans. I still use a lot of products from VF Corp. And they have really, over the years, they have aggregated all of these brands underneath this house of brands model. And presumably, when they acquired a lot of these brands, they had disparate systems, disparate EDI endpoints, disparate e-commerce platforms, disparate everything, right? ERPs, everything else. And I'd love to better understand how, sure, you went from this very sort of narrow sliver with the North Face up front. And first of all, how did you make the transition from an internal tool? Sounded like that first tool that you had to build for getting orders into the system. Maybe that was more of an internal tool than a B2B customer facing tool. But first of all, how did the business make that transition from, hey, we only do EDI to, hey, we realize we actually need to be able to give these B2B customers some self-service tooling that allows them to place orders with us in a painless, friction-free way, even if they can't place orders with us via EDI because they don't have the tooling to be able to do that. And then secondarily, how did that evolve over the years as they continue to add brands to the parent company?
The North Face initially thought that they would build an in-house tool, and they contracted with partners. Geez, now that I think about it, I can't remember the name of it or the contractor that we worked with, which is a little embarrassing, but they tried to build something for us from the ground up. And ultimately, it really didn't work because we'd never had a B2B e-commerce site before. We didn't know what we needed. And we ended up finally just changing directions and deciding to go with a third-party provider. And at the time, the best provider in the space was a company called Centerstone Technologies. They were actually out of Denver, where I am now. They started out as the buyer's page in, I think, the mid 90s, if I remember up. Might have been actually early 90s, but they were at the time a customer facing tool. So the sales reps and dealers could get on there, check inventory, place orders, check order status, all of those things. So it actually existed back in 2002. It existed. And then that was what they started.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Crazy, right? If you talk to so many other practitioners, they came on later and might not have been as aware of what actually has existed in the past. But yeah, it existed. It was there. And you could load product images, you could browse, place an order, all of the things that the basic order entry stuff that you needed to do, you could do it. And over time, that company evolved and added more and more functionality around order entry. And I have to say that my opinion still is that order entry wise, that was probably the best platform that I've ever worked. They were really less interested in trends, less interested in expanding the product offering per se into, for example, digital presentation or showrooming or anything like that. And they wanted to make sure that people could get their orders in. And their platform was excellent for that. Anything you could possibly think of. And a lot of things people wouldn't have ever thought of, they actually considered in place. They were awesome. And at the same time, over time, what the technology that evolved in terms of integration capabilities was something that they weren't able to keep pace with. They were focused. They had a focus, and it was great that they were doing what they did. It was really good. But the ability to integrate in a more instant fashion with API in particular was something that came out, and eventually VF was approached by a company called Plum River. They were out of the Boston area in Massachusetts, and they offered a lot of the same things that Centerstone did. But in addition to that, they offered the ability to connect directly with SAP. And VF was operating on SAP by that point. They really valued that connectivity. And not only could you get order entry in real time, but you could also get inventory availability in real time, get order status in real time. And all of those things really improved the perspective for the sales rep and the buyer in terms of all of the information did to run the business. So it really was a great step forward from that perspective. So the VF North America started to implement Plum River. And at the same time, we were also approached by another company called Elastic. Elastic was also based in Denver. And it's really funny. They had a digital catalog that you could print. So what it did was it took this process that was extremely expensive for outdoor apparel and equipment and footwear and action sports brands as well. Very expensive process to go through the catalog creation started out, eventually ended up in Cork, but these different kinds of print production processes that by the time that you actually got to print them, they were already obsolete. Stuff had been dropped, colors had been changed, trims had been changed, like all of these things that had changed in the product that print couldn't represent because it was a single once and done thing. And now all of a sudden, Elastic was offering something that you could update in real time. And so that a sales rep could go right before their product presentation, pull down a copy of the electronic catalog and give it out and say if they wanted to print it, they could, or they could just send them a PDF and say, here's what we have and know that it was right. So that was pretty exciting. So the North Face decided to take advantage of that. And Elastic also had an order entry tool at the time. And I looked at it and the person running Elastic, Josh Redden, if Josh is listening to this, I'm going to laugh. But at the time, I sat down with Josh and I said to him, there are some really great things about this. And the fact that you could integrate both your electronic catalog and your order entry process, which was fantastic. You can look at the products, you can star them, rate them for your purchasing notes. You can actually add notes to your products as well. So that when you go back to look at what you have, it's all in one place. And then you can convert that over into an order. Wow, this is amazing. But there were still some pieces that weren't quite where I wanted them to be. And I would really, in particular, pricing and sales programs are just such a big part of B2B e-commerce. And they had some functionality, but it wasn't as flexible as we needed it to be for all of our different brands. And so he went back and he worked on that. And then they came back to me in was a little bit later than that. Maybe it might have been 2016. But anyway, they came back and I was like, this is fantastic. Let's just switch from Plum River over to Elastic. In the meantime, what had been happening was that the North Face had gone back to Elastic and said, listen, we really like your front end, but we need this back end from a SAP integration standpoint. We really have found that this is crucial for our business. And Elastic didn't offer that. So they said, can you guys work together to do something for us? Can you make it so that we get the front end that we want and we get the back end that we want? And they said, okay, we'll talk and we'll see what we can do. In the end, they ended up merging. And because of that conversation, we started with them. They said, what makes the most sense is to do what they're asking. That Plum River had a back end that was perfect. It was on point, just great. And at the same time, because they'd worked so hard on their SAP integration or their integration ability, it wasn't just SAP, but on their integration ability, they had let their front end lapse a bit. And at the same time, Elastic, that was what they were all about. Fantastic. So they merged companies. They offered both solutions and you could get the best of both worlds. It was fantastic. And then they bought Centerstone. So that really put them in a really good place as far as the outdoor surf skate ski industry brands were concerned. That was a really strong contender. And there are certainly other platforms in the space that either are already there or are up and coming that have a lot to offer. I don't mean to denigrate anybody because there are some really good solutions out there now. It's exciting to see just how much development is taking place. But yeah, they were fantastic. So that was how we ended up where we did. By the time I left VF in 2022, that's where we were at. And that solution was working pretty well. As a matter of fact, we had started having conversations with our EU counterparts about whether to implement Elastic for their business as well. Elastic has a lot functionality available for EU businesses, region specific, country specific, language specific, all of those different things. And when I left, that was a conversation that we were having with them. Yeah, it's really amazing over the years how many things have changed.
And then you went to Elastic, right? Like after you left VF, you liked
Yes,
it
I
so
did.
much and you liked working with those guys so much. You went to work there. So you jumped ship, you moved from brand side to vendor side. And what was that like?
So I have to say that I learned so much. And it was the idea of drawing back the curtain and all of that. For me, that was it really felt true that I got such a better understanding of how platforms like that are built, what it takes to keep them running. Of course, the entire product management cycle and how software businesses make decisions about how they're going to invest in new technology versus keep what they already have running. And sometimes how difficult that balance can be to maintain. It was really something. I loved what I was doing with them. The team there was fantastic, just such a great group of people. And at the same time, ultimately, I decided to go out on my own. And I felt like my strengths were really in the capacity of working with brands to help them understand how to do the right and how they could improve what they had if they were making choices about which platform to go with, or even in the act of implementation or in the act of integrating with a new ERP. All of those things I really understood. And I have this perspective now from working with Elastic, all of the work that I did at BF with so many different brands, because I work with 14 different brands in the end, which really gives you a good sense of how different companies and businesses approach this type of solution, what they need out of it, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and also how the business size can really impact the way that they do B2B from a resource perspective. So many different things. And I really felt like that was where my strengths lay and that I had a lot to offer people as in a consulting role, which is what I eventually did. I went on my own and opened a B2B clinic and started working with brands to help them make their B2B sites better, fix data problems, fix integration problems, all of those different things that I always did for VF over the years.
I think you went into a truly blue ocean space. At least I feel like I did when I decided finally to completely niche down onto B2B and make that the primary focus of my consulting services. I tell you, it really revealed to me because in the B2C and D2C space, there are just consultants are falling all over themselves. There's a million of them out there. There's a million agencies that know B2C, D2C like the back of their hand. They've got usually very good upfront consulting practices. They have standard design patterns. They have standard stacks. There's a lot of templated stuff happening out in the B2C and D2C world. And there's almost nothing templated from a design pattern perspective that is a universal fit for all B2B businesses in the B2B world. It just doesn't happen. And so I find that the B2B world is significantly more complex. There's significantly more use cases to deal with. There's a range of business models within that context of B2B that exist. There's different pricing models. There's different supplier models. We've got manufacturers that also wholesale and also distribute. We've got distributors that also maybe do a little bit of manufacturing or maybe light manufacturing. There's so many different permutations of it now. And it also feels like the expectations of B2B businesses have also grown, not only in terms of digital capabilities, but also their customers, what their expectations are around not only digital experience, but even simple things like I'm guessing, and I'd love you to validate this. When you first started out at VF, was there a concept of the need to have digital quotes and digital responses to quotes? Was there the concept of MOQs? Was there the concept of indent ordering in advance? Was there the concept of incremental order quantities, individual price lists, tiered pricing? It just feels the complexity in the space has ratcheted up over the years. As the capabilities have grown, so has the complexity.
I will say that there are some things that have changed about that industry over the years as the supply chain has improved. Things like shorter turnaround times in terms of how long it actually takes to manufacture something, and the ability to place orders with less lead time is something that probably didn't exist to the extent that it does today. Also, product segmentation didn't exist at the time in the way that it does today. The outdoor surf skate ski world has changed so much in the last 25, 30 years. Probably 30 years ago, you had a whole bunch more companies like Patagonia, right? Individual companies that were not traded on the stock market. They were private companies. And they were making their own stuff and they were selling it to their retailers individually, and that was it. And over the last 25 years, there's been a sea change, the number of companies that are now owned by larger companies. So almost everybody has been bought out, especially everybody over a certain sales volume has been bought out by a larger ownership. So VF is certainly not the only player in that space. There's Outdoors, another great example of a company that owns multiple outdoor brands. Yeah, I think that has certainly changed things. And at the same time, the idea of sort of RFQ or tiered pricing already existed. If you buy a certain amount, then we'll give you a discount. That certainly existed, but request for quote didn't really exist and still doesn't really exist in that industry. So there were certain pricing things that or certain sales models say that are still the same. They really haven't changed over that time period. Footwear sales, as an example, those sales programs have been a certain way for years and years. And it's usually some kind of a tiered approach by this many pairs, this many different styles, and you get this kind of a discount. That is, I can't see that changing. Like it's just, that's the way the industry goes. And I think that a lot of people also are looking at other brands when they're putting together their sales programs to make a determination about how they're going to structure theirs so that you have, as a buyer, you have the ability to compare apples to apples when you're looking at different brands. That's why they're building their sales programs the way that they do so that people can have some kind of a level playing field to look at when they're making decisions about which brands they're going to purchase.
And the two areas that I see that are probably, at least at this particular time, the biggest differentiators, speaking specifically on behalf of manufacturers now, the two things that I see that are so completely different and just do not exist in concept or execution in the B2C and D2C world are PLMs and CPQ systems. Those systems, just that there's no such thing. And I'd love to just talk about those lightly, both of those. So PLM, product lifecycle management system, all the way from the concept of a product, all the way through creating the tech pack, the design, sending that off to the contract manufacturer or the in-house manufacturing facility, getting that made into prototypes, going through the product iteration process, the sign-off process, the packaging process, all that stuff. And that all happens in a product lifecycle management system. That doesn't exist. If you're just a retailer selling somebody else's stuff, that doesn't really exist. That concept doesn't exist. And in the almost the quote unquote equivalent in the B2C, D2C world would be maybe a PIM system that houses that product information. But in the B2B world, that PLM data would then go into a PIM if you have a D2C channel within that manufacturing business. And the second thing is CPQ. Configure price quote in the B2B world is completely normal. Like it's oftentimes the products that B2B manufacturers and distributors are selling are infinitely more complex or can be configured in infinitely more ways than in the B2C, D2C world where there's one product, one SKU concept, right? Or maybe there's multiple variants, but that's as far as it goes. So those two complexities alone in the B2B world, even if you only focused in on those two things, you could probably make a career out of it.
I agree. Totally agree. And the configure price quote, that piece, I will say that in the outdoor search space, you don't really see it because the products really aren't.
Yeah.
And while I was working with Elastic, I got to start to understand the golf industry more. And they're all about configurations. That is, a huge piece of their business. So it was really an eye-opening experience to see just how complex that whole piece was in trying to build an order for people to go and like, how do you not only, if you have a golf club that's made out of 6 different parts that are the grip and the shaft and part at the end, like, what's the part at the end called? The putt? Is that the head? Thank you so much. I think I hoped you would know. Anyway, but yeah, if you have 67 different parts that you have to put together, and then you might have, say, with each of those, you've got 6 or 7 different options that you can pick from to build your club. And you're a retail store that's trying to decide, I know that there are some people who are going to want to customize the club personally. And then I need to have at the same time inventory on hand for people to actually just purchase. The complexity of that kind of a purchase is really, it was really something that surprised me, but at the same time, once got into it, totally makes sense, but it is very complicated. And yeah, I think I'm really only touching the surface of that whole CPQ process. And when I'm talking about that, it's huge.
Yeah. I was working in heavy equipment, and one of the areas that I went the deepest in my career from a CPQ perspective is telecommunications. And when you think about the mix of products, services, hardware, subscriptions, one-offs, rebates, subsidies, when you think of all the different models plus all the service layer that goes with it, installations and maintenance, and just the bewildering for consumer and for businesses and everything else, the amount of products and the amount of quote unquote virtual SKUs that you can end up with in that environment that are composed of component SKUs that are then built out into a final SKU that gets delivered across sometimes multiple ERPs and multiple fulfillment systems. Sometimes internally it's delivered, sometimes it's by a 3PL, sometimes it's by another distributor. Like the order management, routing, like when we think about those things in the B2B world, there's really nothing that comes close in the B2C and D2C world. There's nothing that approximates that. And that kind of goes back to my original. Thank God there's nothing that approximates that, because I think B2C and D2C people would rip their hair out if they had to deal with that on top of customer acquisition and personalization and all those things that they have to worry about in their world, right? So the reality is that we have our own set of unique challenges. And even when I go into, and I still do occasionally work with, say, a D2C brand that maybe wants to establish a B2B channel, or a B2B brand that wants to establish a D2C channel, I still do work in that space too. And it's not like I ignore it, but I just find that in the B2B world, because of the nuances that apply in every single B2B business that I come into contact with, yes, there's patterns, there's similarities, there's certain things that I recognize when I go in, oh, I've seen this before, but maybe not in that combination, right? But it really never ever gets boring. But that also, I think, demonstrates for me the fact that roughly only 40% of B2B businesses in the United States today have any form of automation or e-commerce in their businesses. That is a terrifying statistic. Like they only 40% have any form of automation at all. And that may be something as simple as a digital catalog. That doesn't mean that they're transactional necessarily across a platform that they could be transactional with. And when I start to read these updated stats that come out of DC360, come out of the American government, come out of there's several sources of statistics, and they vary slightly, but any way you slice it, the reality is that digital commerce is just not a thing for the lion's share of B2B businesses today. And I find that really sad, because the giants always have e-commerce. They have EDI, e-commerce, punch out. They usually support all three. And then the smallest businesses who could benefit, so I'm talking 50 million or less in revenue, B2B businesses, they're the ones that could actually benefit the most from automation, and yet they don't have it. It's really, truly, and I feel like those smallest end of town, they're going to get squeezed out pretty quick if they don't jump on board the train.
So I guess I think of it in a couple of different ways. And one is with that large percentage that doesn't have that kind of e-commerce presence online. On the one hand, yes, I think that there's an expectation among buyers are also online purchases now. And we all know that, right? Everybody gets online and we all go and we buy stuff. So anybody who is a buyer has likely already purchased something online and knows that process exists. So there's definitely an expectation that's created. Same time, I kind of wonder with the level of complexity that B2B businesses can experience, sometimes the kind of solution that a small company would need, maybe it doesn't exist. And so they're left with either having to choose to work with probably a third party provider that would be cheap enough for them to be able to afford, who has a single solution. Maybe it has some configuration flexibility, but there's a limit to how much they can offer. So you could work for a third party provider that doesn't do everything you need and then fix it as it comes into your system or somehow try and prevent it. What are you going to do there? Like the process might not be better for you if you were trying to purchase or trying to allow purchases online. It may actually be more labor intensive for your customer service reps or for your sales reps who are trying to sell. See, I think that at this point, that 60% that doesn't have it, either they can't afford it, they can't find a solution that actually works for their business. I feel like it's unlikely for most businesses at this point that haven't at least considered it. And that there's probably a reason that they haven't adopted. Either they're waiting for the right solution or it's just too expensive for them, or yeah, their processes are complicated and the cost benefit analysis doesn't really work out in that direction. What do you think about that? Does that make sense to you? Because you certainly worked with a company that had a very complicated sales process. It made me wonder whether how your sales reps had how they worked with that online e-commerce site. But does that make sense?
100%. I think I'm seeing as a catalyst for those brands to basically sit on their backside, they oftentimes, at least from what I've seen, it isn't necessarily that they've even investigated e-commerce because two scenarios keep cropping up again and again, which is legacy businesses with legacy founders, older founders, generational founders, family companies that maybe they're on their third generation now. Recently worked with a client and they're just about ready to go live with their first ever transactional B2B e-commerce system in their business. They're a third generation family company. So granddad founded the company, dad took over, kept everything the same, manual processes, manual salespeople in the field, all that sort of stuff. And then the grandson came along, became the CEO of the company, and then COVID hit and none of their salespeople, and they traveled all throughout the islands, the South Pacific Islands, seeing customers, and they could no longer go see customers during COVID. And all their customers and the vast majority of their B2B customers are generational family businesses. And now the children or grandchildren are taking over the businesses and they're going, why can't we just buy this stuff online? Why do you have to even come and show us the new swatches? Why do you have to even come and show us all these different things in person when we could, as long as the photos were realistic and as long as the photos are good enough and we have the statistics and the tech specs around the product, why can't we just buy this online at the price that we've agreed? And so there's a lot of generational friction here still, where I think there's a lot of people in legacy industries with legacy mindsets that just need to friggin' retire and get out of the way and let the younger generation get on with it. And I see also the other situation that I see quite a lot is monopolies. So a lot of B2B brands historically have had an absolute monopoly in their space. They're the only manufacturer of this thing, right? Or this thing in the way that it does this thing, or they're really famous brands. And so they've virtually got a monopoly and they go, they can't buy this anywhere else. Why the heck do we need to do e-commerce? They can just continue to buy via EDI or they can continue to buy via field sales or ring into customer service or whatever. Stuff this. We don't even need the hassle of e-commerce. But I've seen also on the flip side of that, I have seen very disruptive new players come into the space, the same space. And if they have completely sat on their hands, this new disruptor might be a pure play B2B online business. They might not have field sales reps. They might not have physical stores. They might not have all these different things behind them as alternate channels for customers to buy through. They are a pure play B2B online business. And those guys really put pressure on legacy businesses because a certain cohort of those existing customers of the legacy business will be wanting to do e-commerce. And if they can find a supplier, they can get those same or similar products through, or alternate products through at a similar price, but it's a lot more frictionless by buying online because they've cracked it. They've cracked that nut. They will move in a heartbeat. And I've seen that too. I've seen that forced. I think I've told this story on the podcast before. I was working with a multi-billion-dollar B2B brand in the APAC region, and we were consulting to them. They worked in the automotive parts space, heavy equipment parts, a few other verticals. And multi-billion-dollar business had literally $0 of e-commerce in the business before we came along. And they were doing a pilot project, a proof of concept project in one of their divisions and in one of their brands that they wanted to trial e-commerce and figure this whole e-commerce thing out so that they could use that as maybe a bit of a blueprint or a template to roll out further across the business over time. And I was just absolutely blown away that a multi-billion-dollar business this was in the late teens, 20 teens, but I was literally floored when they said, no, we don't do e-commerce. We just don't. We don't do e-commerce in the business today. And I was thinking, how can a business that is that large and that influential just say, nah, we're not going to do it? But we saw this. If we look at what happened in the B2C, D2C space during COVID, so the Primarks, the H&Ms, there was a lot of brands, not many, but there was some pretty famous brands that notoriously said, we don't do e-commerce and we will not do e-commerce. We are a physical brand business. That's it. The closest we will get to e-commerce is click and collect, and that's it. There is going to be none of this buying online, ship it to your door crap. We're not going to do that. And I tell you, they've all been forced to eat their words now. And they've all done it to a greater or lesser degree now because they had no choice. And I think that's what's coming down the pipe for a lot of B2B businesses. If they don't get off their hands and make a move, they're going to have their lunch eaten by those that do.
Maybe. I don't think I would say that you at least got to be mostly right. I think that I still go back to the idea that for some businesses, it may not be the cost benefit may not be there. And if it's not, then even though you have users or potential users who would like to get online and order from you, if it's not going to make their service experience better, if they're not going to get more information more quickly by going online, okay, that from a business point of view, I get it. Makes sense. At the same time, to your point, it is getting less and less likely as time goes by, technology improves, functionality improves, all of those things happen, and people's expectations continue to rise in terms of what they can do online. That it's less and less likely that the cost benefit analysis is going to swing to not having some kind of an online presence for e-commerce. It just won't eventually. I can't see it going either way. Yeah, I don't know if you necessarily will get left behind or not, but at the very least, there's going to be a point where it no longer makes sense, dollars and cents, to not be online for most companies. Maybe there'll be some kind of little, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that somebody makes on an alley somewhere. On the very,
That doesn't make sense.
you gotta walk up and they make it for you right there or something like that. I don't know. But then that's not really B2B, that's B2C. Never mind.
But I agree with you. I think there are some use cases that are particularly difficult. But what I would also say in those scenarios, usually, oh, great, do it.
The one that I have is horseshoeing.
Oh, yes, yes,
You run a
yes.
ranch or you run a riding stable or you run something, but as a business, you need someone to come and shoe your horses. I can see where that would not translate well to an online e-commerce business.
They could book and pay online and then book and pay and online, and then you come out and you deliver the service. So I think it's even for my services. People said, oh, you'll never be able to sell your consulting services online. And I said, watch me. And then I did it and I turned it into a subscription and it's sold as a subscription, as an e-commerce product subscription.
Yes.
And so I productized the service, gave it a fixed subscription price. And I think people get hung up on, oh, it's got to be a physical product that you sell, or there's certain criteria that have to be there for you to be able to e-commerceize something. But to your point, I think you're right in that not all products in a catalog necessarily will lend themselves immediately to being able to be sold by e-commerce, but there might be a subset of the catalog. There might be just replenishment ordering that is available via e-commerce. There might be certain things that you can take into an e-commerce environment that just work and they unload significant other areas of the business. Maybe it's not every single SKU you sell, or maybe it's not every single category of products that you sell, but there's almost always something that could be used as a proof of concept that is it's not a massively heavy lift to get it into an e-commerce environment. And you can nibble around the edges of it as you find your feet, as you develop your capability, as you develop your integration layer, as you start developing these things out within the business and you build the muscle of e-commerce. I think it's not all or nothing in most scenarios, right? And I feel like that's a better path forward than doing absolutely nothing at all for these B2B brands.
Yeah. I think if you can find a way that where it makes sense, I think, yeah, there's nothing that should prevent you from going that direction, really, because you're going to go that direction anyway. So might as well get started, right?
Got to do it. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes, the more technical debt you've got in your business to deal with. So I think that's a real challenge for a lot of these businesses. And so now that you're in the consulting space, similar to me, my eyes were opened. I really, the capability, I had a sneaking suspicion that there was not a tremendous amount of us out there doing consulting in the B2B space, but I wanted to put it to the test by really focusing down on that. And it's been a breath of fresh air to be able to go into a space that's not 100% red ocean. There's a whole lot of blue ocean out there. We can easily differentiate ourselves. We have our own specializations. We have our own capabilities and experiences. And it feels like there could be 100 of you and me out there, or 100 more of you and me out there tomorrow. We could all eat very well. And it just feels like there's such a lack of specialization in this space still, because we're B2B commerce is probably a decade roughly behind where B2C and D2C is. And so there's a lot more D2C and B2C e-commerce skills out there in the marketplace, digital marketing skills out there in the marketplace, et cetera. And I feel like there's still, even if a brand is building up that muscle of B2B e-commerce internally, and they have 2 or 3 people inside that know it inside and out, if they want to rapidly expand their team, it's still difficult to do. And so there's 2 pathways. They either take someone inside that knows B2B inside and out and try to upskill them on e-commerce, or they hire someone that's got all the skills in the world in e-commerce and they try to give them all of the training and skills they need to understand the B2B business side of things. But there still feels like some massive backfilling that is required in the industry by people like you and me to plug the gaps.
Agreed. I completely agree with you. More of what I see is the former rather than the latter, where you have somebody who is already in the business and they've been asked to or tasked with taking on this management of this website. And the thing that I see more often than not is that the business tends to underestimate the amount of work that's required to keep the site running they want it to run. And also there are so many different things that you can do to automate your approach to data maintenance. And you have to, because otherwise your admin is just gonna, oh my gosh, people tear their hair out trying to figure out how they can get all of the data updates made that they need to make in a particular day. But a lot of the time, something that I wrote about recently is that so much more often than not in the B2B space, that information that you're going to post on your site about your products, it's not really available someplace else, or you actually have to create it. That your product search terms or your product hierarchy on the site, navigation hierarchy, all of that stuff, it doesn't exist for a lot of brands within the ERP, PIM environments. It just isn't there. Teaching somebody how to automate the creation of the data that they have to make, as well as automating, updating the apparel industry in particular, is just one of those where it's really hard to close out line development on a season. I'm continuing to iterate on a particular product, sometimes well into the selling season before you start producing. And very understandable. You want to make the best product possible. You want to make the most popular product possible. And of course, there are always production issues that come up that are unforeseen, but for various reasons, product line changes. And so trying to keep up with that is something that really requires a lot of either VBA skills, also software coding skills that can go and Python was a great example, or one where you can go in and look for changes and then apply those changes to your data feeds. But yeah, I think that I see a lot more of that, hiring somebody within or putting them into a position from within because they know the business and they know the products, they know uh, the cycle of production. And that totally makes sense, but it is a difficult transition if the person doesn't already have really strong skills in some of these other areas like Excel, like VA, like Python, something that would help them to automate the work that they need to do.
No question about it. There's obviously more tools out there now than ever before to integrate into your stack that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. But certainly having a technical enough background and a sound foundation in data analysis, I think is super critical. No matter how much automation and integration you have in place, being able to understand the foundation of what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, and then how can we add the automation layer on top of that. And more importantly, why do we have 56,000 prices in our price matrix? Why do we have 33 fabrics and 22 colors and 36 sizes? And why do we have these things? What is the business requirement that means that we have this complexity? Why do we have evergreen products versus drops? Why do we have seasonal products? Why do we have all these different things in the industry? And then we have these behemoths like Shein and Temu and all these others that are, what is it? They're producing thousands and thousands of new styles a week. I think it's something like 6,000 new styles a day that Shein is producing at the moment. And so it's like, how are they even just, yes, a lot of those designs are stolen. I get it. But even if the designs were all made internally from scratch, how the heck do you go from a design to a pattern to actually manufacturing, being able to get it out the door and ship to someone's door within a 24-hour turnaround time? It is just phenomenal. And I think a lot of I think this is running in parallel. This change to our world and our industry, this just in time, not only manufacturing and shipping, but just in time design is where we're getting ever closer to completely personalized bespoke products with every shipment. We're getting dangerously close to that now. And the feedback loop from the shop floor back to the manufacturing plant, it's a direct line now. And we're getting to that place very quickly where if these B2B brands can't even think through the process of adding B2B e-commerce, what about the rest of their business that is getting challenged? Their entire business model is being challenged. And so I think these brands really are going to have to take a long, hard look at every single facet of their business and start thinking about how can we speed every single thing that we do up through the use of automation, technology, efficiency, removal of barriers, and how can we just basically make everything more frictionless? To steal a term from the B2C and DTC world, they're trying to make the buying experience frictionless, but also introduce friction exactly where they want to introduce it, which is the browsing experience, the cross-sell, the upsell opportunities, all those things. Whereas in the B2B world, that's all we're trying to do is remove friction. We want them to be able to log in, place their order as fast as bloody possible. We're not going to hold them up by trying to cross-sell and upsell and personalize. Yes, there's an element of that with complementary SKUs and products and that sort of thing, and predefined shopping lists and all those sorts of things. But the reality is that in the B2B world, we are all about removing friction to that customer because they oftentimes already know what they want by the time they log in. They just need to short circuit the time it takes for them to log in and actually complete the purchase. They don't want to spend a lot of time browsing. They're not sitting on their couch late at night going, oh, I'm not browsing for family and friends. I'm browsing for my job. So I think all of these brands are getting challenged across every facet of their entire business model, and they're going to have to take a long, hard look at themselves in the mirror. That's my position.
I think that you could be right. I think that you're right in any case in that in order to operate the most successfully as they can as a business, they have to do that anyway, right? They've got to make sure that they can get the fastest time to market so that they're not asking for orders 8 months in advance of a season, because when you ask for something 8 months in advance, people have a hard time deciding. How do you know what's going to be popular by them, what the trends are going to be? So yes, taking every single bit of efficiency and get out of your whole production system and cycle just only makes sense as a business. I went to a girlfriend's house and I know that we're probably pretty close to closing, but I'll end here. And then if you want to talk about anything else, we can, but I know we're close to done. But I went to a girlfriend's house a couple of nights ago for dinner, and she's got her children a 3D printer. And gosh, that's so amazing as a parent to invest in something like that. Her kids are all teenagers and they're loving this thing. They are using it so much. It's incredible what they're making right now. They're really into dragons. They're making these dragons that have bodies that are made out of different links so that they're really flexible and making them with these different color filaments. And some of them are iridescent and it just blows my mind. Anyway, but it got me to thinking about the fact that a 3D printer is inexpensive enough now for her to be able to make it, to have it in her own home for her kids to use. So what else can you make with a 3D printer? And I started asking her, can you make anything woven yet? Can you make fabrics? What kinds of materials do you have at hand that you can put to use in something like this? And why wouldn't you, if you could buy a 3D printer and make something that fit you perfectly in the color you wanted in 6 hours? Why would, and then what does that do to that entire, just really drops this very beautiful, convenient bomb right in the middle of all of our B2B processes, because all of a sudden, if you have a 3D printer in your home and you don't mind paying for the materials, you can pretty much do whatever you want. So anyway.
That's absolutely correct. I have thought about this often, is that we're going to get away from nearshoring and we're going to get in homing. And that's how close it's going to get. It's maybe we ship the raw materials maybe to someone's door or something like that, but then they make everything on demand themselves, or maybe not everything, but a significant portion of what they use in the home, they could make on demand as they need it and as they want it, as opposed to having to go down to a store and buy from a preset selection of what's on the shelf, right? So it's a brave new world we're heading into. Julie, I thank you so, so much for your time. Now we are coming down to the end of our time together, but I always like to flip the script. I always like to turn the microphone over to my guest. I always like to let them ask me one question, any question they like, personal or professional. Julie DIXON, what's your question for me today?
My question for you, I'm going to go back to a question I asked already a little bit because I was interested. I've been so interested. I'd be so interested to really turn the tables on you and learn more about your career, your history, and how you came into B2B. But actually, let's go with that question. How did you get into B2B?
Very good question. My background, not for the entirety of my career, I wasn't doing B2B the whole time. I certainly started out in the B2C and D2C space. I fell into e-commerce full stop. It was very unexpected and it was very unplanned. However, I will say that I am of a generation, I was around and alive and kicking and cognizant of the world pre-internet, during the internet, and now we're in the post-internet era. And so I could see even then, even before, even when I was young, I was in my late teens and early 20s when the internet was really starting to take hold. And I could see even then, this is not just another fad. This is not even just another trend. This is going to change everything forever. I knew it. Even then, I was like, I don't know exactly where this ends up, but this is going to change literally everything. And then through a mutual friend, I met a gentleman he was an American guy living in New Zealand, just like I was at the time, and he ran an agency. He ran an e-commerce, a digital agency, and he was looking for somebody to come work with him, work in sales, biz dev, lots of other roles within the business. It was just a small agency, only a few people, and he was looking for someone to really come in and help him shake the industry up. And so I went to work for him, and they were building e-commerce sites, they were doing digital marketing and a few other things. And this was in the very, very early days. We were building on OS Commerce. We were building on some other really old technology of the time. And then as a sideline, as a side hustle, when side hustles really weren't a thing back then, I was like, no, I want to get into this e-commerce thing for myself as well. I see this as the future. So as a side hustle, we had our own quote unquote SaaS platform, even before that's what we called it back then, for e-commerce. So my friend and I, we paid for a site on their platform. We started doing e-commerce. My friend was in technical sourcing, product sourcing, and we started up the first dedicated memory card store, online, pure play online store in New Zealand. And no one had done that. This was when a 32 megabyte memory card was $650. And so you can't even, it's hard to get sub gigabyte memory cards now. We ran that. We ended up selling the business, and I ran that for 7 years with my business partner. Had a great time. Then went back into agency land. But how I then started to focus and niche down on B2B is an interesting story, in that the agencies that I helped build and run were all primarily B2C and D2C focused. But when we had a complex B2B project come through the door, And it wasn't that often, but when we did, those were always the most interesting, the most fun, the most challenging projects I had there was no, hands down, no comparison. And through those selective experiences along the road, I decided this is the fun part of e-commerce. This is the hard part of e-commerce. This is where the challenges lie. There's no such thing as vanilla in B2B. It doesn't exist. There's a lot of vanilla in B2C, D2C, but there's almost never any vanilla in B2B. And I was like, I started to get more and more bored with traditional B2B, D2C commerce because I primarily approach things from a technical and operational perspective. And that is used in spades in the B2B world.
Absolutely.
And so that's really how I came to really continue to niche down more and more on B2B because I saw that there weren't that many resources in the industry that specialized in it. There was a growing need for it, and it was the most interesting work I could be doing in a space that I love. So hopefully that makes sense.
Totally does. Thanks so much for sharing. Excellent story.
My pleasure. Now, how do people get a hold of you, Julie, if they want to work with you and they want to partake of your incredible B2B consultancy services? Where the heck do they find you?
So you can find me online at theb2bclinic.com, or you can email me at julie@theb2bclinic.com. Very easy. Very simple.
And do you like people to reach out to you on LinkedIn as well? Or you prefer, if you prefer email, you prefer they go through the website?
Nope, absolutely. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me under Julie Dixon. I'm not sure if you look for the B2B Clinic, whether you'll find me or not, but you should be able to, I think. Yes.
Fantastic. Look, I will put all of your links down in the show notes underneath this episode. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, and I can't wait to speak with you again soon. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.